Hello, everyone, and welcome to Dragon Talk. How is everybody going on this fine Monday afternoon? Is it doing good?
A+.
I'm Greg Tito, and I'm joined by...
Shelly Mazanoble.
As well as two other people.
Woo!
Hello, we have Jim Zub. Hello.
Hello.
And Mr. Patrick Rothfuss.
Howdy.
How's it going?
I'm doing well. We are rocking and rolling. How are you guys?
I'm too
So
caffeinated,
excited.
I think that's what...
Not caffeinated. Oh, no.
All right, I'm going to drink all this.
I'm very excited, and I'm glad I didn't know that these were our guests until like an hour ago. Because I would have been a little nervous. I think I would have been a little nervous.
You think so?
But look what I did. Prep.
On graph paper, no less.
Never.
Oh,
With my D&D pencil.
Nice.
Oh, wow.
So we are talking to you guys because you wrote the series of the Rick and Morty and Dungeons and Dragons crossover comic book series from IDW, and it's the first issue came out 2 weeks ago. Is that right?
I think 3 weeks ago.
3 weeks ago.
God, has it been that long?
Time.
Yeah.
Canadian time.
It's Canadian
No,
time.
it
It
was.
3 weeks ago.
It was when I was at PAX. I forgot. I was on the road for those 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Crazy. So how long was this process? When did you guys know you were going to start this, and how long did it take?
Well, first off, it's not just Rick and Morty and Dungeons and Dragons. It's Rick and Morty versus Dungeons and Dragons.
It's true.
It is conflict in full effect. It's good stuff. The process started well over a year ago.
Yeah.
Wow.
When were you first contacted about it, Pat?
I remember it at some point. It was last year, and I kind of told them, it's like, boy, I would love to. You probably don't want to work with me, you know. And
That's
part of
the
it,
ringing endorsement of Pat Rothfuss right there. That's
I try to lead off all potential collaborations that way, just so everyone really, like, later on when they're like, Pat, you're fucking this up. I'm like, I told you.
I
I
told
told you
you.
didn't want this. It's also a great way to start your relationships, everyone. Just, extra little piece of advice there.
Yeah, when you
You're
meet
gonna hate
someone new,
this.
you'd be like, I'm going to mess everything up.
You're going to hate me so much.
I can only improve your expectations from here.
Exactly. It
So
started at the bottom.
I'm pretty sure it was Emerald City Comic Con last year. The Oni Press people and the IDW people, two wonderful comic publishers, they were out for dinner. And I don't know if libations were flowing, but they were sort of like, what about crossovers between our crazy companies? What kind of things could we do? And someone at the table said Rick and Morty versus Dungeons and Dragons, and everyone laughed. And then it just stuck in their craw, and they couldn't let it go. And the discussion just sort of rolled from there. I've been writing the official D&D comic for IDW since 5th edition launched.
Mm-hmm.
And so literally the next day, Sarah Gatos came to me, she's editor at IDW at the time. And she said, this came up during a discussion. Would it be something that you're interested in? And I was like, yeah, of course, but it'll never happen. Like this will never, you can't get this through the corporate filter.
What
Like,
did you think? Because like wizards would say it would never happen, or
I sort of both. Like Adult Swim, it wouldn't necessarily be on board, and Wizards of the Coast would sort of be baffled. I mean, the Rick and Morty, it's intense, right? Like it, and we were gonna do this, we would have to go for the throat. Like we really wanted to do this crazy. So I said, sure, but this will never happen. And then months would go by and they would tell me, no, we're making headway. And I was like, sure you are. And just continually sort of putting it off in this sense of some faraway thing we would talk about years from now and go, man, that would have been cool.
It almost came together.
Yeah, exactly. Because it just sounded like that kind of pie in the sky sort of project, honestly.
Yeah.
But we live in a new world of crazy synergies that could not have existed, any other time. I think pop culture fandom is in a whole new level now, and people realize that the stuff that would have previously, I think, just been like fan fiction is now ripe for the attack.
Yeah.
I think it also speaks really highly of of Dungeons and Dragons and Wizards, because there's sort of a traditional business model. I think there's kind of two things going on here. One of them is, watch this. I'm going to relate this to like what happened in the Middle Ages with the rise of the aristocracy and then the fall of the aristocracy. Come along with me on a magical ride.
Professor Rothfuss, tell us all.
Here it comes. Weirdest analogy you'll hear today.
I'll take notes.
What happened is like the landed gentry kind of started to lose a lot of their power and their money. And you had the rise of like this new money, the merchant class, right? And the two traditionally, like they didn't want to get along, but they both had something that the other person wanted, right? The merchants had the money, but the aristocracy had like sort of credibility and power and longevity, and they knew sort of like what to do with some of these things. And so typically what happened is a noble house that had gotten real poor, somebody would marry into a merchant house where somebody had gotten real rich. And it was sort of like a little bit of chocolate in the peanut butter, not to make it weird, but...
We have a question about that.
Yeah, we do.
Exact phrase later.
We'll get there. But similarly, you have Rick and Morty, which is like, it's the new big thing. It is the flavor of the day. It is the hot shit. And what's D&D? D&D is the thing that has been around forever and that people have loved. And it is a property and a product that has been lovingly curated by people who adore it for literally decades, which in terms of gaming and fantasy is almost as long as history exists, Wow. For effectively 40 years, that's been going on. And so I think, for one, Dungeons and Dragons is really smart because in this analogy, they're the nobles.
We're the poor nobles, though. To be clear, we're the poor noble house.
and not poor nobles. Right. This isn't a perfect analogy. I'll admit that. But really, you guys, like Dungeons and Dragons is like sort of this beloved, monolith of like, it was the beginning. It's the alpha and the omega of gaming. And so what they should be doing traditionally is you hunker down, you protect your land. If anybody like does anything that looks a little like D&D, you sue their asses off, right? You sue their asses to the ground. Think about the Tolkien estate. That was the reputation that the Tolkien estate had for a long, long time. And honestly, it hasn't changed that much. It's an aggressive defensive stance because this is all you're ever going to have is this thing. And so you protect it viciously. Now, this is to speak really highly of D&D because they are not doing that.
Right.
And right now, like Critical Role starts up and they're like, hey, we made a world. Hey, we have a show. Hey, we're doing a book. And what D&D did not do is come in with the cease and desist. Why? Because despite the fact that they are sort of the old landowners here, they are not mired in this really retrograde manner of thinking. And they're like, hey, everyone, like, it's great. Come play, literally come play. And everyone benefits from it.
And so, I think that's what's so incredible about it is everyone involved in this process has been so open and excited. And rather than all those, I mean, we get to take, normally you do a parody and you have to file all the serial numbers off because you can't use the real terminology, you can't use the real titles. And instead, everyone welcomed this crazy monstrosity with open arms and said, make fun, have a good time, tear into all the little bits and crazy things about D&D and show it off, warts and all, because that's what we all love about it. That's what the fandom loves about it too.
Right. Right. Yeah. And there was, I think there was a shift. It was like right around when I got here.
Oh.
You were here much longer.
It was you, Tito.
It was not me. I might have been a drop in the hat that pushed it towards the streaming
It was
and
you
doing
that just
stuff.
stopped paying attention. Like,
I just
people
didn't
were
ask.
Like, oh wait, what's happening?
Yeah, I was just like,
that was your job. You were supposed to protect the land.
I know. Shelly had this podcast. And I was like, I'm just going to get into this podcast and mess it all up and invite
And
people
now we're like
in.
talking about D&D and stuff.
And there were times where we were talking to other creators in the RPG space, and they'd be like, "Is it okay if I talk about other games?" I'm like, "Yeah, of course. It's all. It's all part of the community."
Yeah, I think everyone gets afraid. They get really worried about
right. Because they're used to the Tolkien estate kind of idea.
I just assumed this was going to be this real corporate pain in the butt, and instead the pain in the butt has been us because we're like perfectionists, and we're going to make Troy Little, our glorious artistic collaborator. We're just going to ruin him with the amount of insane stuff he has to draw.
I think it looks like he had a lot of fun though with it.
Oh, I'm amazed his morale is still high. We haven't broken him yet.
So once, go ahead.
I think he's playing it real cool until he gets to be in the same room with me, and then we're gonna have like a Baron Harkonnen situation where he's gonna fucking use his poison tooth to finally bring me down.
We'll make sure you never are in the same place.
That's right.
So going back to
there's some stuff in there that as we're pulling together the script, I'm just sitting there thinking, if I was the artist and I read this, I would be so mad. I would just be so mad. I'm like, what if we had like 24 kobolds? Like, what if there was just more of the thing?
True.
I do someday hope to show off, because with the third issue, like seeing how you turn some of what I loosely refer to as scripts into like real scripts.
It's really like it's sort of a fire hose of stuff. It's great. It's all amazing. And I'm just reading and I'm like, there are panels here. I got to figure them out. It's wild. It's
so
really
how did
good.
the process work? Because I know a lot of people who are listening now may not realize, and I was one of them, a few years ago when someone was trying to talk to me about how comic books were made. I didn't even realize there was a script. I didn't realize that was in the same vein of sequential art that screenplays are. So when you guys were putting together the words for this, how did you begin? How did the process work?
Stan Lee just cries out Excelsior, and then it just happens. Really
bursts fully formed from Troy Little's forehead.
All that happens. He gets really excited, and the ghost of Jack Kirby just appears, and stuff starts happening. No, it's it is an interesting process where it is a script. So there are two different types. There's you can do scripts that are more sort of broad and formative, and then the artist draws a bunch of panels, and then you come in and dialogue it at the end. But we're both Pat and I are more kind of controlling than that. So the full script is the norm, honestly, for most of the comics that come out nowadays. So you're writing a page by page, and in many cases, panel by panel breakdown. Here's the visual moments we need to portray. Here are the expressions of the characters described. Here's the setting where they are. Here's the dialogue as close to final as we can get it, so that the artist can leave room for it. Or in our case, hate themselves as they try and leave room for it. And then they send thumbnail roughs of how the paneling's all going to break down. And then we'll sort of talk back and forth about adjustments that can be made or ways to improve. And the artist is also figuring out where they might be able to combine panel concepts or which panels. Almost every page is going to have a larger sort of visual moment or something that anchors the rest of the scene. And we talk about how that's best going to work. And then the stuff gets taken through to final line art. And at the same time that they're doing lettering proofs, it's being colored and finalized. And in the case of something like this, you also have an extensive editorial process because you have multiple license holders. You have, 2 writers, 3 editors, and a partridge in a pear tree kind of thing.
Yeah. What I send is a script sort of in the same way that like it looks more like a play where it says summer angrily, or Morty, throwing his hands into the air, where there's like almost stage direction for most of the lines. And I know it doesn't translate well unless you're doing something where like every time somebody speaks, they have their own panel, which isn't good comics.
Right.
It would actually translate much better to like a television format, which is probably like I've done a little more reading and participating in the production of scripts in that direction. But then when Jim brings it back, and then I try to like leave room for him to play, or to be completely frank, to leave. Then I'd be like, I fucking don't know. Like, here's a bit. It's like now an adventure thing happens. Can you do this? Because I'm fucking empty. I got no idea.
That was my favorite part of I think it's script 3 where it just says and the adventure part, and I was like, right, the adventure part of D&D. But we also built the story together, like so right from the get-go, and this is how I knew it was going to work. Whatever mad science or however much gray hair I was going to get by the end of this process. When Pat started talking about it, he said sort of like a mission statement, and he said, look, people think that Dungeons and Dragons is about killing monsters and getting gold, but it's not. It's about coming together as a group to collaborate and tell a story together and learn things about ourselves through the game, And he says people think that Rick and Morty is just like nihilistic violence and ridiculousness, but it's not. It's about a series of broken people trying to figure out how to live with each other. And I was like, oh, we are both kind of keying into these broader sort of thematic things. And as much as this will be a fun story and a silly story and, tweaking the nose and elbowing in the ribs of both these properties, we can actually do something more emotional. And some of the things that are most amazing about Rick and Morty when you watch it or rewatch it are some of those unexpected emotional bits and getting beneath the surface and really digging in on the characters and their personalities. And so as soon as that kind of came through the pipeline, whatever else was going to happen, I was like, well, we just got to get this runaway train to go in that direction and it's going to work. And thankfully, again, everyone involved in the process kind of believes in that as well, that we are doing this on those sort of 2 levels. Like you can just read this and it's a violent, silly, ridiculous story that makes fun of Dungeons and Dragons as much as it warmly holds it to its bosom. But it also is this, story about what is great about D&D and the things that it does to empower all of us and why we all love it so much. And the same thing with Rick and Morty. It is those ridiculous characters and they're awful and they say and do terrible things to each other, but it's also their broken ways of trying to communicate and be a family. And I think that that's in the long run, if we're able to stick the landing on the 4th issue and everyone reads it and gets out of it what we want, that's kind of the core. That's why it is what it is,
That's really great. I mean, I feel like that's the thing I'm always trying to tell people who don't know anything about Dungeons and Dragons, that, it's not about, people always ask about the dice or,
sure,
what if I don't know about what character I'm going to be or blah, blah, blah. I'm like, it doesn't matter. It's about getting together with your friends and then you figure out those things, that those are just a framework for the stories that you're going to tell together. And that's what's really important.
We collaboratively are going to do something that we couldn't do as individuals, and we all don't know where it's going to go, but we couldn't have gotten there unless we did it together. And I think that that's what means so much about D&D to me and has meant so much about it ever since I started playing when I was like 8 years old,
right? And
why it sticks with me so much. When I went into the office and hung out with you guys in October and we were brainstorming on upcoming coolness, I really had this moment where we were all sitting around talking about D&D in the D&D office, and I'm like, oh man, this is my tribe so bad. Like this is everything I've wanted, role playing to be, and gaming, the people and the camaraderie that comes from it, the emotional quality to it. It's the best.
We even have the jackets.
That's right.
I gave Jim one of the Demogorgon jackets because
Oh,
it's like, oh, you
nice.
put it on. I was like, oh my God, this
You
is
really are
perfect
part
for
of
you.
the tribe.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. And then Pat having that same warmth around gaming. You know, we would have Skype calls and just trying to stay on target with our original goals for the phone call and just going off in the weeds, talking about all the things we love about the game and our experiences in it. Just like anytime you get together with gamers and you can't help but, you know, tell 100 little anecdotes and fun memories.
Right.
So how did you two, like, I'm assuming, I don't really know how comic books get, how you write
Sure.
them, but so do
Right.
you think of, you conceive the whole series before you
Yeah,
start?
comics are different, very different from prose and even film in some ways, because generally speaking, the format is very set. It's more like episodic television in the sense you've got whatever with commercials, you got 21 minutes plus the opener and the stinger and all that stuff. So you know exactly how many pages you're supposed to have, Pat. You know how many pages you're supposed to have.
Page.
You may know.
Issue 3 was your fault. You've already admitted that on the live stream.
So we were supposed to have 20 pages per issue. And so we had a real set format. So when I lay it out and when we talked about the story, we're like, okay, here's the amount of story material we need to cover. Here's all the things that need to happen to make the story go mechanically. Here are the scenes that are required in order to play those dramatic moments out. Therefore, I have this many pages to do this scene and this many pages to do this scene. And it seems like it should be very structured. And usually it is. And then Pat would run with it in these amazing ways and come up with even more grandiose, crazy dialogue and little turns that enhanced all of it. And the editors and we were sitting down with some of this stuff and we were like, man, we don't want to lose a line because it's all so good. And I'm bridging stuff and trying to make sure it all fits. And we built this wonderful thing together. And then I'm finding myself, you know, begging my editors for, oh, can we just have an extra page or two? Oh, can we just, you know, it'll work even better.
I'll go to the factory and tape in an extra page in each issue.
Yeah, you can't do that normally in corporate comics. And because it's not just me, it's also Troy and it's the letterer and it's the colorist and it's the deadline. And then I said, but look, it's Pat Rothfuss. What is a deadline? I mean, come on.
Oh man,
No,
twisting
no,
the knife.
Wow.
I say it lovingly. You know that. You know that.
Book 3's coming soon.
Direct all inquiries to Dungeons and Dragons.
We'll take it.
But honestly, if it wasn't so, and everyone just broke. It's kind of this thing now where I feel like I've seen a new light where there are no page counts.
What do page counts even mean anymore in the digital sense?
It's so amazing. No, but we really do have so much awesome material, and that's why with each issue it creeps into amazing new page counts, and it pays off in all sorts of awesome ways. And Pat's, honestly, some of the dialogue is so good. Like, it's rare that I would sit there and read dialogue in my head like this and genuinely laugh at the acerbic Rick dialogue that comes naturally out of Pat and delivers with such punch, and the pathos that he's able to get out of Jerry as well really knocked me out. And I'm just trying to keep as much of that gold as possible and add in all sorts of extra little nostalgic bits of D&D and bring all sorts of other, you know, sort of bridging elements into the fold at the same time, and try not to kill Troy. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm really looking forward to maybe eventually, because issue 3 came around and I sent it off and it came back and I was like, and I'm like, ooh, so many pages. Like, I'm so glad that, I mean, I'm kind of responsible because I did send off the script, but it's not totally me because they're the one that put the page count on it. And so then I went through and I'm like, I know this is too many pages. What can maybe I weed out? Because believe it or not, I really strive towards economy in my writing. You know, and that's why the books take so long, is I constantly weed things out while I'm writing. So I went in and I pulled, I'm like, ooh, we can pull these panels. I can pull this line of dialogue. It gets tighter. And then I'm like, oop, but now I need 2 more panels for this other thing. I need to hit this beat. But also, it was issue 3 where I was like, what if we did a page that looked like this? And then I drew like the grossest, crudest like thing. And I'm like, I've read a lot of comics. I've read a lot of Alan Moore. I've read a lot of, some of these, Xander Cannon did some really interesting paneling in, I think it was like Top 10 or Promethea, where you see some of these like next level comics.
Well, because we don't have to follow like film. We don't have to follow. You can change the aspect ratio of the panel. You can change the feel of a page in really unique ways for comics. And a lot of times the corporate stuff, they won't necessarily do as much of that because I think they're just sort of being more expedient. But if you can get really wild with page layout and with the effect it has on the reader.
Yeah,
that's cool.
I remember seeing some of those. So I proposed 1 full page that I think is going to turn out pretty good. I was pretty sure, and I knew I could trust the team if they looked at it and they're like, oh, I see what you're trying to do, but no, that ain't going to work. And then it came back and I'm like, oh, cool, shit, I think it will work. And then there was another sort of half page. I'm like, I know we've got it kind of laid out like this, but could we do it like this? I think this might get it across. And that's some pretty like baby step stuff compared to like what Alan Moore did in like Promethea, like the wild paneling, where like there was a 2-page fold out in the first volume of Promethea where people came in on this page, they went up the fire escape outside of a building, you had a whole conversation inside the house, and then they left through the fire escape and came down the other side. And it was an entire scene in a 2-page fold out that was very intuitive to look at, but also you were just looking at a building. And I'm like, who the fuck, does this? This is brilliant and beautiful. And so I've taken like a tiny step in that direction, because for me, like, again, what as Jim has seen, left to my own scripting devices, typically you'll get a screenplay, not a comic script.
Got it.
And figuring out also how to most effectively deliver some of that stuff in the panels. Like, and not every panel needs to even have dialogue. Silent moments, you want to contrast out big action and big dialogue, or, quiet moments or transitions and all this kind of stuff. And it's something that, the more you work with any kind of medium, the better you're going to get at it. So it's been kind of fun sort of saying, okay, here's trying to bring my strengths into the fold and say, okay, here's good comic storytelling, or here's what we can do to sort of play with it. And also reflect back. Like there's a scene in issue 4 that is parallel to issue 2, and we use the exact same paneling and the exact same pacing to visually bring you back to that moment and remind you of something that happened earlier, because it has a thematic kind of payoff. And doing that kind of stuff can be a lot of fun too, where you have sort of echoes of earlier ideas, or in the same way that in a movie, someone will say a line of dialogue that they said earlier, but it means something very different now that they've gone through this story, stuff like that. We can do really, really fun stuff.
I love that kind of stuff for sure.
That we don't have to make this simplistic just because it's some kooky corporate crossover. Like, we're trying to hit these weird high points and do all sorts of crazy stuff, because who knows when will you ever get the chance to play with these toys in this way, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And at the same time trying to inject as many references to my favorite D&D adventures or NPCs or adventures or source books, like just putting those in there, like as the broad kind of ingredients of, don't we all love this stuff?
And there's definitely, we've made a few allusions to it now with the nerd culture or whatever you say. There's going to be Venn diagrams of people who will, be comic book fans, Rick and Morty fans, and Dungeons and Dragons fans. And we don't need to necessarily sell to those people for this thing. They probably already have it, and
sure.
It's probably why it's so. But like, what would you say to folks who? I'll just take myself for an example. I didn't read a lot of comics when I was a kid growing up, and I'm sorry to say, I haven't seen any Rick and Morty yet.
What?
People have told me it's
my
amazing.
God. Even I watched it.
See, you're all better people than I am.
Jeez.
But I'm a
will
Dungeons
like
and Dragons fan. So like, what would you say to those type of people who don't already have an affinity to all three of these things? Like, what does it bring to it?
Well, I mean, in terms of D&D, one of the things that's been really a joy is that it's all real D&D. Like sometimes they'll do D&D in parodies on TV shows or in other media.
Big Bang
and they
Theory.
always have to file the serial numbers off and, it's mansions and manticores, or this sort of thing or whatever.
Ooh, that's a good one.
So this is like real hardcore D&D. We have a sequence in issue 2 where the party is crushing stuff and we'd have the proper experience point totals and, like ridiculous things like this, right? All the stuff. And we go through the different editions as well. So I sent Troy dozens and dozens of images of like, hey, don't just, here's the first edition player, DMG, but make sure you get that back cover correct because it's really distinctive. You know? Like really ludicrously detailed nerd stuff. But at the same time, because we want to get it right, because it's the real thing, you know what I mean? But on the other level, it's also a joyous story about gaming. It's a joyous story about coming together and discovering a new hobby. And I think that that's kind of universal to a lot of people. I don't think it has to just be D&D. It's about the joy of finding things that you didn't know you could find joy in, stuff like that as well. Pat, you want to run with the torch on the Rick and Morty or whatever other angle?
It's something I had to come to grips with when I was working on book 2 in my series, where a lot of people had read the first one. And I knew that some people, despite all of my prayers, would pick up the second book without ever having read the first one, or who might have read the first book like 4 years ago, and then pick up the second one. And there were people who have read the first book 20 times and then would read the second one. And in the future, some people would reread the first one and the second one. And so whenever you're writing anything, you're writing to a lot of different audiences. I used to teach writing and I used to sort of beat that drum kind of mercilessly that if you're not thinking about audience, you're screwing everything up. I'm not really a big fan of the write for yourself school of thought. And so we have people who know a little bit about D&D, who have only been exposed to D&D through Stranger Things. We have people who have only done D&D for 4th edition and then they quit because they only liked 4th edition and then it moved on. We have people who used to play back in the day and gave it up because they got out of college and couldn't find a group. We got people who started way back in the day and now are in their 40s and have kind of played it off and on ever since.
And you got people who have just found the game through places like Critical Role and the Adventure Zone.
Yep, right. And that only really experience it in a narrative way and have never done it at a table.
Yep.
And, the one thing that I think I'm pretty good at is being able to understand a reader's mind no matter where the reader is coming from. And so it's like, I kind of wish it was just a series of Venn diagrams as opposed to a vast n-dimensional, like matrix-like data array.
Nice.
of like the 18 different potential large audience types and then the 27 smaller potential audience types. But when you come right down to it, what I really want to do in a story is I want there to be a lot on the surface, so no matter who is reading it for the first time will enjoy it. But I want there to be enough farther down that no matter how many times you reread it, you always see something new.
Yeah. And that was important, I think, across the board, that you wanted to be able to read it, you get all the high points and you go, oh, this is a funny story. Oh, this is all about gaming. And then you go back and you reread it and you see whether it's certain turns of a phrase or little bits in the background or jokes on the bulletin board in the school or little things that'll keep people sort of engaged on that. when I started writing the D&D comic, Legends of Baldur's Gate, that came out around the same time as 5th edition launched, I said, look, as much as I want the D&D hardcore to read this, and I hope they do read it, I want something that a brand new reader who doesn't even play D&D can just read a great fantasy story and get excited about it and want to experience more fantasy stories branded with Dungeons and Dragons. That this isn't just playing to the absolute grognard,
Right.
And all the terminology, that we want to make a great dramatic story, a really fun story, a great character story first. And it just so happens to follow the canon. It just so happens to fit all the rules. It just so happens to be Dungeons and Dragons and use all the proper monsters in all the places, but you don't need to know them all with encyclopedic knowledge in order to enjoy it. But if you do know the stuff, if you have read the books, you'll see those little notes. You'll see those little touches that we have gone deep, but it isn't required in order to be entertaining.
So I think we wanted to ask about how deep the chocolate.
Yeah.
Right.
How deep up in that chocolate did you get?
Technically, you go into the peanut butter.
Oh.
Just
So how deep into the peanut butter? 'Cause you said you were going to get pretty deep in there.
Sometimes,
Sometimes
when a peanut butter loves the chocolate very much,
They make a Reese's peanut butter cup.
they make a really bad analogy.
yeah.
I believe your words were something sticky and delicious.
I would send Troy these art notes that were like, here is what a kobold looks like in 2nd edition, and it's different from 3rd edition. And because this is a 2nd edition moment,
Oh my
in a
God.
Rick and Morty book, you have to get it right. And this is what this is. And here's the size differences between these creatures. And here's what this means. And, stuff that I don't think even made it to the page, like just ridiculous stuff. I also wanted where sometimes you would have sort of generic kind of fantasy terminology. I would always want to steer it back to actual D&D, or even better, if we could be specific about an adventure.
Yeah.
So as an example, in the first issue, Rick takes Morty on an adventure, but it's not just any adventure. It's an actual module, L1, which is The Secret of Bone Hill. And that was literally just me looking through a shelf and going, what is the most base title that Rick and Morty would make fun of because it sounds vaguely wrong? And immediately
That's a fun exercise.
Bone Hill just wins. Like it's the top one, right? So I said, okay, they're going to Bone Hill, and I had them do a little bit of banter about Bone Hill, and then Pat just grabbed hold of that on the script revision and just drove deep into bizarre puns around Bone Hill. And so that's been that fun kind of riffing. It's almost like improv. Like it's like you're always plussing, you're always adding something to the mix. And I wanted it to be actual scenes from Bone Hill. So they're talking about Restonford, the village, and all this stuff. And all the NPCs are correctly named. But it's also just a dumb Rick and Morty joke where they're just going to talk about boning endlessly and all this kind of stuff. So
On a hill. But
on a hill.
Yeah, the chocolate peanut butter, I don't know if you guys who are listening got the reference, but that was in the announcement press release for this. As a quote from Mr. Rothfuss about the press release. And that's part of my job sometimes. I don't know if people know that I have to go and review press releases from our licensors. I think that's the only time, Pat, that I've actually laughed out loud at my desk at a press release. So kudos to you for that.
Now, I will admit that sometimes what I do is I just start to speak, and then what I have said sort of leaves me, much like the spirit descends, and then I hold forth, and then it is gone from me. Do you have the direct quote? Because I honestly can't remember exactly.
Yeah,
we can find it.
Let me call it up.
We actually, I meant to bring
my copy of Bone Hill here. Hold on.
Yeah. Oh, you're opening it up out of the original plastic?
Well, it's not the original plastic.
Okay. Phew.
Dude, I play these adventures, man.
I know. I just want to make sure. I mean, I know that we have Alex Kammer from.
I know. I could hear him weeping.
I know, right? That he does all of his.
Sound of plastic coming off of an old adventure. No. So while Greg's looking that up,
the actual code is now I got it right. So So I love Rick and Morty with a powerful love, and I played D&D since the 5th grade, said Patrick Rothfuss. So when they approached me about writing a story with both of them together, that's some serious, you got chocolate in my peanut butter shit right there. I'm in. I'm all the way in. I'm getting that chocolate all up in the peanut butter, like deep in, all the way in. It's going to be sticky and delicious.
How did we get that in a press release?
I remember.
I think you get some leeway with Rick and Morty.
That's I would normally
would
be like, oh, that's probably not a good fit for the Hasbro, and then I'm like, all right, no, it makes perfect sense for this.
If you were working on like Dragon Heist, maybe you would have edited that.
Maybe.
But I feel like it's Rick and Morty.
Do you know what I'm really looking forward to? I'm looking forward to the next D&D comic miniseries I do after Rick and Morty, where I've just been corrupted, and I'm just going to be all like, 20 pages? We can't do this in 20 pages. Are you crazy?
All this
And then
leeway.
We need more burps.
all the limit, it'll all go back to normal, and they'll be like, oh, you're not in that playground anymore, Jim. You got to slow down now. Come on.
Ruined.
I know.
That's
So
right.
we have all these comic book covers for this first issue splayed out in front of us.
This many covers?
Is this normal?
When I left a little bit, when I left early on, it was because we started this and a box just showed up.
No way.
And it's not just, it's been sitting there, but I haven't opened it up because I knew about all the covers, but I haven't seen all the covers. So I opened up the box, like literally sitting here. It wasn't that I'm doing my mail when I'm not talking on this interview.
Paying my bills.
It's that it's like now here in front of me for the first time, I get to see
There are many covers.
some
Oh,
of,
you got them all. Yep.
some of
They're
these.
so good. I just love that.
So what happens is,
Oh, this is a good
they're
one.
called variant covers, and if you're not a comic collector, what it is they'll do a thing where they'll sometimes, if a retailer feels like they can really hunker down on a book and it's going to do well for them, they might order a specific cover just for their retail outlet, or a convention event might have their own special cover, or an online outlet shopping might have their own special cover. And to say that there has been a lot of support for this book, it's ridiculous. In addition to the regular covers, there's also these special character sheet covers. So what we did was we made 5th edition stats for all the family.
Yeah.
First issue is Morty, and he's I think he's a 6th level half-orc rogue.
Yep.
And so he got statted up. Adam Lee, who I got to give big ups to, he did the stats based on our ludicrous specifications, and then we went back and forth on them. And that's a blank character sheet cover, which you also can if you want to make a Rick and Morty style D&D character. And so we got to stat up the whole family, and each cover is going to have a different member of the family. And I think issue 2 is Summer. And then
Issue 2 is Summer, yeah.
Yeah, issue 3 is, there's going to be 2 covers. There's going to be Beth and Jerry, and then issue 4 is Rick. But there's a bonus thing in the back of issue 1, and I just asked for it. Like, again, I feel like I get to be so indulgent. I said, Rick has been playing since 1st edition. He would have a maxed out Archmage. So what if we had a 36th level Archmage in the back done up, and lo and behold, they statted it up for us.
Oh yeah.
And
My friend Nate Taylor, folks that know
This guy.
my stuff,
Oh, there you go.
Nate did up that sheet, and a lot of the flourishes, like the things written in the margin. That's why I love working with Nate on everything we do. We did the picture book together. He illustrated Slow to Guard for me. He does my maps, and all of the little things, and the marginalia on that character sheet is the pure, beautiful child of his brain,
Love that.
including shit just that's like never trust Gary.
right. Do you know what made me laugh about that was too is he said, what kind of stuff do you want on the character sheet? And I just wrote I think 10 or 12 little dorky things, and then he put them all in.
That's
I thought he was going to put 1 or 2, but I was like, oh, what if he has a pet beholder called Norb the Orb? And he's like, yeah, okay. There's all sorts of stuff. He's got stuff in the margins that are he's got a puzzle code, like you had written it in the margin from a module, that's where you keep the the mnemonic for a puzzle.
Right.
All sorts of really good stuff. And there's also ludicrous things of like power gaming stuff, like Rick has super eidetic memory, so he has all spells permanently memorized and stuff.
That's a good looking cover.
Is
there, Pat.
Troy a D&D guy? Has he ever played?
He is.
He is.
He just recently started replaying 5th edition because he's been running his kids, and so he's got the bug bad, which is kind of nice.
That is good.
Yeah.
I love all those like little. I mean, it reminds me of the sticker sheets we do here with Emi Tanji.
Yes.
I will use the graphic designer here, who does the graphic design for Dragon Heist that just came out, for example. But I'll give her like, oh, I want these things for the sticker sheet, and then she will write the most hilarious stuff in the margins. And I love that they see the light of day in these sticker sheets and her type of thing. So that's great. Oh, that's a good one too.
I just got a Dragon Heist today, actually.
Nice.
In the mail. So I'm really excited.
Good mail day for you guys.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So one thing I do want to let you guys know, all of these covers, you can collect them on your own. That's totally possible for fans out there to do. But if you are going to Game Hole Con, which is in Madison, Wisconsin, run by a friend of the show, Alex Kammer. He will be auctioning off a set of all of these covers, all for charity, for our Extra Life initiative there to benefit Seattle Children's Hospitals. So if you're going to Game Hall Con already, check out that auction and get it. We're trying to figure out how to do a digital version of it, but I know at least there will be an analog auction available. I think that's pretty cool.
That is awesome.
Yeah. Because I know it's a lot of work.
I think issue 2 will be out at the end of the month. It might be, it's either last week of September or first week of October.
Sweet. So it's going to go like one a month, and there's 4 issues total for this?
Yeah, there's a skip month in the middle because when we got extra ambitious on it, all of a sudden, I think issue 2 is like 23 pages and then 24 pages. And then the last issue is 24 pages. So we had to give Troy a little more room, so we have a skip month in the middle, but we'll be done by end of the year. So
cool. And it'll end up being a discrete story at the end. People will be like, "Yeah, great."
Yes, yep. And the last script is done. We're just basically putting the last little tweaks on it. Troy's deep in issue 3, finishing up issue 3 line art, and and someday sanity will return. It's good.
Yeah. He's as deep as the chocolate is in that peanut butter right now.
That's right. And I think what's been so fun about it is the indulgent aspects of it. Like issue 3 has references to the old D&D Saturday morning cartoon.
Nice.
Oh,
like we've got tons of first edition stuff. And
Jim.
Oh, sorry.
They all die. They all die at the end, right? At the end of issue 3, and then they have to get resurrected.
Keep talking about issue 3. I'm very.
We're talking to the hardcore here. It's okay.
Leave a little. Oh, this is not. This millions of people watch it. Let it be a surprise. Let things be a surprise.
So we'll just roll back the tapes 5 minutes.
No. I just wanted to gently tug on the brake there before anything got revealed. That was really
the cover to issue 3 has already got it's out there in the wild, and that's got the dungeon master from the old Saturday morning cartoon.
I love that, Pat. You're being the Don Cheadle of this interview right here. Where you're like, no, don't spoil what happens here at the end.
I've always been vehemently non-spoiler, like. In all my different types of media, there's you only get to kiss somebody for the first time once, and you don't want to wreck that. So,
especially with that luxurious beard.
You don't want to wreck it for the person who's receiving that kiss, right? They can only do that once.
Gorgeous.
Excellent. Well, what else? I know you guys are all working on 1,000 million other projects, but what, anything to hint at for what's to come in the next few months other than these awesome books?
What are you working on, Pat?
I'm actually working with Nate on a comic project that we've got a few offers in on, but it's likely that we might just kickstart it. It's the comic adaptation of The Boy That Loved the Moon. It's a story out of my world. And he and I have been roughing out the thumbnails and the paneling. Working with a team on this comic project has been great. And there's been a remarkably light amount of oversight from the IP holders. But like me and Nate work really well together, and being able to really just go ahead and do our own things and be answerable to no one is a real delight. So we're sort of playing around there and mostly making ourselves happy. And that way, if we want to publish it as an entire volume instead of a series of whatever, we don't have to worry about hitting like a 20 or a 22 or a 23 issue arc just to satisfy like an individual comic retailer thing. We can write the whole story as it maybe belongs as a graphic novel. But then maybe once we're done with it, we'll look at it, and if it breaks up reasonably well into pieces, then maybe we'll consider that for a larger release or something like that. But that's one of the other things, some stories going on. I'm working on the Hollywood, the TV show and the movie thing.
How's that going?
It's an interesting world.
That's about as much as we get from the D&D side of things too. We're like, all right,
It's interesting.
That's a morass of fun that we are getting sucked into. What about you, Jim? I know you got lots of other, your Avengers titles, all that.
I'm juggling quite a few comic projects. So I've got the monthly book I do at Marvel is called Champions, and it's sort of the young heroes of Marvel. So it's a bunch of these younger heroes. Some of them used to be Avengers, and they quit the Avengers because they felt like that the Avengers had lost their way, and they wanted to get back to what was really important, like making the world a better place and sort of fighting for a world that they're going to stand to inherit in the future. So you've got characters like the young Ms. Marvel, you've got Miles Morales, Spider-Man, you've got Riri Williams, Ironheart, Viv Vision, the daughter of the Vision, Sam Alexander Nova, Nadia Van Dyne, the Wasp. All these characters kind of brought together along with a new character that I created called Snowguard. And we're doing all sorts of classic sort of teen superhero stuff. But the upcoming story that starts in October actually takes them to this sword and sorcery side of the Marvel Universe called Weird World. And I'm making no delusions of the fact that it's a big, my D&D self is a big influence there. Nice. Two of my favorite stories when I was growing up were, there's a story in Uncanny X-Men 190, 191 where Manhattan gets turned into a fantasy world, and the Avengers and the X-Men all get turned into these fantasy characters. And that was like pure joy to me when I was a kid, because it was like my two favorite things, superheroes and D&D coming together. And then there's a 2-part story that came out as well in the 80s where the X-Men go to Asgard. And so it's like, oh man, mythology crashed into superheroes is one of my favorite things. And so I'm really taking a lot of those influences and doing this 3-part story that starts in Champions number 25 and doing this big wild sword and sorcery story. And it's being drawn by Max Dunbar, who drew Legend of Baldur's Gate. Mm-hmm. So
I think he's in the building right now.
Too, or he was.
Is he?
Yeah.
Excellent. Just grab him, drag him into the studio.
Exactly.
Here.
Get to work.
Yeah, Legends of Baldur's Gate, the book that he and I did together at IDW, the first sort of 5th edition D&D comic. And so I have pulled him into the Marvel fold to do this sword and sorcery story. It's going to be a ton of fun. At the same time, I'm wrapping up my creator-owned series Wayward, which has been published in Image since 2014. So issue 30 comes out, and it's the big climax. And that'll be out at Halloween, and it's going to be just this wild apocalyptic finish for all the characters and all the plot lines that we've been sort of spinning together. I've got more D&D comics coming in 2019 and other projects that will be announced probably at New York Comic Con.
Sweet, man. That's too much. That's too much to list.
It's a little bonkers.
You guys make it sound like writing comics is like something you just do in a day. I mean, how do you have time to do all of this? That's a lot of stuff you both just rattled off that you're working on.
I would like to really, really make it clear that comics is something you don't do in a day.
No.
I would like to share that one of the major things that I've learned over this process is that comics just don't happen in a day.
Oh, because that's what I took away from this.
There's fewer words doesn't mean that it's easier to write.
No.
In fact, like it's I know why it works this way, but like these email threads. There's like,
Your
There's-
body language right now is
know.
like basically my world.
you know, there's this program called Slack, and it's designed so that multiple people can get together and discuss a thing, and it's not like looking into a Cthulhian abyss. Can I please bring this to the process? You people, because it's like, how about we have 8 people discuss something on a thread with 80 messages in it?
Yeah.
And the thing is, I know that typically, like, they're used to this, whereas, like, I usually go off and I write a thing, and then I talk to a couple of people about it one-on-one, and then I'm like, hey, here's the thing. Let's copy edit it, because now it's done.
Right.
And instead, there's this very important and I'm sure essential and reasonably derived process of approvals that requires so many emailings back and forth.
Oh yeah.
Lots of the electronic mails.
Experience for me. Yeah.
Yeah. See, now Slack, you mentioned when you're like in the email like work zone, adding in a Slack thing just means like, okay, now I have 2 programs I need to be watching that are not on the same level, and it's okay. Now I have this other. Now social media gets added onto that now, where like people, we're using Twitter direct messages as a form of communication. So now we got 3 things that I've got to watch. It quickly becomes even worse. But so the goal is to get everyone on one thing, I think, and then
and the truth is, it's mostly that. Like, I've recently transitioned my email, and the way that Google threads messages is profoundly counterintuitive to me. And so, like, if I'm up and I'm watching emails come in, I can participate. And if I miss a day, it's like, well,
you're out.
I guess I just will never know what happens on the rest of this thread.
And then Jim, I don't know if it's Canadian email or something like that, but your messages seem to put the threading is like below the message that I just sent you. Your reply is for some reason.
Right.
I don't know.
The one that's screwing this up.
It's in French and English, and it's covered in maple syrup. We do things differently here, okay?
Yeah, all I see is you with like red maple leaves over your eyes.
That's right. I come in and I just say bonjour, and then I just write the whole thing
backwards.
But you know what's really great though is that in the process, the Canadianness comes through. I just say I'm sorry over and over again. And the whole thing gets done. It's really powerful.
It is. It's true. Well, thank you guys. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, we're at time here.
Yeah, we actually have some folks coming in. So thank you so much for spending the hour with us. I really loved it.
Yeah.
I feel like I could listen to you guys talk forever and ever. So this should be like a weekly.
I know.
You guys
Keep
did that
this
live
series
stream
going,
Yeah,
'cause
with
we
the
need
team.
to talk more.
I love it.
Hey Pat, it's an ongoing.
I don't know. I feel like eventually I'll hit my stride. Right around 28 pages, I think, is my technical length.
It is the perfect format.
You guys are awesome. Thank you so much. We'll look for issue 2 coming next month, right?
Well, it's either end of this month. It'll either be last week of September or first week of October. But issue 1 is available everywhere fine comics are sold, or they're sold out. You need to hit them up for reorders
and get a different cover.
Collect all the covers.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Cool.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much, Twitch listeners. We will take a short break right now and be back on with Wolfgang Bauer and Megan Miracle, who are downstairs. I got to go let them in.
Oh, boy.
I think I just got a call from reception, so I got to go get them.
Get them.
All right. I'll be right back.